Mm. Hallo Leute, ich bin Katja und ihr seht Deutsch für euch. I will admit I'm kind of scared of teaching this topic, but we will have to do it at some point. So today we're starting with the big topic that is German sentence structure. I've mentioned this before, but the thing is, in German, unlike in English, sentence structure isn't this one big set thing that rarely, if ever, changes, but one huge mess of, oh yeah, just put that wherever you want, except there, and there, oh yeah, and there. But don't close the tab just yet, please. I know it tends to sound scary sometimes, but it's not my fault. Well, that was overly dramatic. Also, what would I be here for if not to make things like these a little less confusing? So, to sound a bit more professional for a moment, in English you have your clear structure. Subject, verb, object. Always and forever. If you get crazy with it, nobody will really be able to understand what you're saying in the long run, but they probably will deduce rather quickly that you might be German. Why? Because in German we like to switch things up every now and then when it comes to sentence structure. That keeps things interesting. Or cruel, depending on what side of the spectrum you're on. The thing that allows us to do this is our big system of declining, conjugating, and overall just changing the forms of about half of our word groups to express exactly the function we want a word to have. Every form has its own function, mostly independent from its placing in a sentence. See the key word here? Mostly. Because obviously, if there weren't any rules whatsoever, we wouldn't be having this conversation. Or one-sided conversation. So yes, of course there are rules for placing in German too. There are just a few more than in English. Today we're going to start with this topic by taking a look at what positions the predicate can take on in a main clause. The predicate is the conjugated or finite verb in a sentence. It is basically the key element in expressing what you're talking about. We will only be talking about main clauses in this week's lesson. Main clauses, or in German, Hauptsätze, are independent from other parts a sentence can have. Unlike subordinate clauses, which we will talk about in 2 weeks. I will be using the word clause a lot because I want to make sure that you understand that this is not the same thing as a sentence. A sentence can consist of one main clause or 2 or more main clauses attached to each other by conjunctions, or one main clause and 1 or more subordinate clauses. So when I say clause, what I mean is only that specific segment of a sentence, regardless of whether there might be more segments or not. If it becomes necessary to put in another part of a sentence for showcasing, I will put that part of the sentence in brackets. And one more thing before we get into it. I think most of you are probably aware of this already, but the only way to internalize this is to practice it. The reason why I'm putting such a big emphasis on grammar topics on this channel is because I personally find that it can be a big help to understand why you do certain things. So what I'm trying to say is, you won't magically have perfect syntax after watching these videos. But you will know, or at least have heard of, the mechanics and will be able to understand the way a sentence works when you read or write one. And isn't it just so much fun to know what you're doing? Okay, enough stalling. Hauptsätze. We have to differentiate between finite and infinite, unfinite, the other thing, verbs for this, which means verbs that are changed to fit the subject, and verbs that are not changed. As I mentioned, the finite verb in a sentence is also called the predicate. There's always only one predicate in a clause, no matter its kind. Finite verbs can take on 2 different positions in a main clause. Firstly, we have a few kind of clauses in which the predicate is the very first segment. That would be, number 1, questions that ask you to make a decision. That would be yes or no questions and also or questions. Imperative sentences, so sentences telling somebody what to do. 3. Some sentences using the conjunctive that express wishes. And 4. A certain form of jokes. There will be an episode on each of these in the future, but let's just take a look at an example for each of them now. Hilfst du mir? Gehst du in die Küche? Willst du Vanille oder Schoko? Hilf mir! Geh bitte in die Küche und hol mir das Telefon. Würdest du mir doch helfen? Könnte ich doch in die Küche gehen? Kommt ein Mann zum Arzt. The latter two are rarely seen, but I included them so the list would be complete. The second position a finite verb can find itself in is also the second position in a clause. So that means it is the second element. Quick note, I'm saying element because an element doesn't necessarily have to be one word. That's why I'm not using the word. The first element will often be the subject of the clause, but it doesn't have to be. This, by the way, is the form that all statements appear in. It is also the form that is closest to the English order of things. Whee! So the instances in which the finite verb takes the second position in a clause are these. Number 1, statements. The first element can be A, the subject, and B, the object, plus its preposition if there is one. 2, questions asking for a sentence. So questions starting with who, where, what, when, and so on and so forth. There will be an episode on these words in the future. We call them W-Fragen, so literally W questions. So, statements. Du hilfst mir. Du gehst in die Küche. Mir hilfst du. In die Küche gehst du. This order is rarer than the one with the subject going first. It's usually used for either emphasis or it can also be seen in poetry. Wem hilfst du? Wohin gehst du? Now, there are main clauses in which there is more than one verb. This can have different reasons. It could be a sentence expressing the passive. We could be looking at a verb that is a combination of both a verb and a preposition, or we could have a combination of the thing that we talked about 2 weeks ago, a Hilfsverb and a Vollverb. In all of these cases, the predicate has two parts, a finite one and an infinite one. In a Hauptsatz, the infinite part of the predicate is always put at the end of the clause. So this could be the Vollverb, a preposition, or a G-form. The two latter of which I haven't talked about yet, so don't worry. This is completely independent from the position of the finite verb. It could be in both the first position or the second. The infinite part of the predicate of a main clause always goes at the very end of the main clause. So we end up with the following examples. In yes or no and or questions, kannst du mir helfen? Willst du in die Küche gehen? Willst du Vanille oder Schokolade essen? Imperatives. Geh mir bitte das Telefon holen. If you paid close attention, you may have noticed that this construction was already contained in our wish sentences. So we still have würdest du mir doch helfen and könnte ich doch in die Küche gehen. Statements. Du kannst mir helfen. Du willst in die Küche gehen. Mir kannst du helfen. In die Küche willst du gehen. Funnily enough, this construction with the predicate having two parts is seen much more often than the one with only the finite part because this is much more appropriate to use for emphasis. And finally, our W questions. Wem kannst du helfen? Wohin willst du gehen? Okay, let's do a quick summary. In main clauses, the predicate, which is the finite or conjugated verb in a clause, can take on either the first or the second position, making it either the first or the second element of that clause. It takes the first position in yes or no questions, or questions, and also imperatives. It also appears in some sentences using the conjunctive, which is the topic for another episode, and a certain type of jokes. It takes the second position in all statements, and questions that demand a sentence or at least more than yes or no for an answer. So questions that start with who, when, where, what, etc. And if we have a predicate that consists of two parts, the infinite part always goes at the very end of the clause, completely independent from the position of the finite verb. And that is it for today. Try translating a few sentences to practice this. Okay, your random word of the week is die Schale. Bis nächste Woche. Tschüss!